December 24th, 1971. A routine holiday flight was about to turn into one of the most unbelievable survival stories in human history. Lanza Airlines Flight 508 had taken off from Lima, the capital of Peru, heading toward the city of Pucallpa. A total of 86 people were on board. Families traveling for Christmas, students returning home, children excited about gifts waiting for them the next day. For the first 30 minutes, everything felt normal. The crew served breakfast, passengers chatted happily, and the cockpit was calm. Pilots discussed their plans for the holiday, completely unaware that the clear sky outside would soon vanish. As the aircraft approached the Amazon rainforest, the weather changed with alarming speed. Thick, dark clouds gathered in front of the plane, swallowing the sunlight. Within minutes, a massive storm system stood directly in the aircraft's path. The pilots made a fateful decision. Instead of attempting to fly around the storm, they would go straight through it. As soon as Flight 508 entered the storm, chaos erupted. Visibility dropped to almost zero. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the cabin for split seconds. Violent turbulence began shaking the aircraft so aggressively that luggage burst out of the overhead compartments and crashed onto the passengers below. Screams and prayers filled the cabin as the aircraft bucked like a toy in the hands of the storm. For nearly 20 endless minutes, the turbulence only grew worse. And then, disaster struck. At around 21,000 feet, a bolt of lightning hit the aircraft's right wing. Instantly, flames shot across the metal surface. The passengers near the windows watched in horror as the burning wing began to break apart. Within seconds, part of the right wing tore off completely, and soon after, part of the left wing followed. Now uncontrollable and disintegrating, the aircraft began falling apart in midair. At roughly 10,000 feet, only 15 minutes before it was supposed to land, Flight 508 started breaking into multiple pieces. On the ground, air traffic controllers monitoring the flight saw the plane's radar signal disappear suddenly. Some hoped it had made an emergency landing, but deep down, they knew what that disappearance meant. A massive search operation began immediately, the largest in the history of Peru at the time. Heavy rains, dense jungle, and dangerous terrain slowed the rescuers. When search teams finally reached the crash site days later, they found pieces of the aircraft scattered like confetti across the Amazon rainforest. Suitcases hung from treetops, torn open by the fall. Christmas gifts were stuck between branches like decorations on a dark, tragic holiday tree. They found no survivors. Or so everyone believed. Because unknown to the world, lying deep inside one of the most hostile jungles on Earth, a 17-year-old girl was still alive. Her name was Juliane Koepcke. She survived a fall from the sky, but could she survive what waited for her on the ground? The real nightmare was only beginning.
When Juliane slowly regained consciousness on the jungle floor, she had no idea how long she'd been lying there. The rain from the previous night had soaked her clothes completely, and the thick Amazon mud clung to her skin like glue. As she tried to move, a wave of dizziness hit her, and she collapsed again. It took several attempts before she finally managed to sit upright. Her body was in terrible condition. One of her collarbones was broken, her right shoulder and left calf were deeply cut, her knee was swollen, and one of her eyes was completely shut from the impact. Her glasses had been lost in the fall, leaving her vision blurry. Even worse, one of her sandals was missing, which meant she would have to walk through the Amazon barefoot. But despite her injuries, one single question filled her mind. Where is my mother? Juliane had been traveling with her mom, Maria. The two were heading toward a biological research station in the rainforest, a place Juliane had spent much of her childhood. Her parents were zoologists, and she had grown up learning the dangers of the jungle. which animals were poisonous, which plants were deadly, and how to stay calm during emergencies. Now, those lessons might be the only reason she had a chance to survive. Weakly, she called out for her mother. "Mom, can you hear me?" Only the sounds of insects and distant frogs replied. After resting for several hours, she pushed herself to stand. Every movement felt like fire under her skin, but she forced herself forward, searching the area around the crash. She screamed again, hoping, praying for a reply, but the jungle swallowed her voice. Hours passed, but she found no other survivors. The forest was breathtakingly beautiful, but also hostile. Sunlight barely reached the ground through the thick canopy above. The air was humid and heavy. Strange calls echoed through the trees, some familiar, some terrifying. Juliane knew one thing for sure. If she stayed in one place, she would die. She remembered her father's advice. If you ever get lost in the jungle, find flowing water. Water will guide you to people. So she began searching for a stream. Moving through the dense vegetation was painful. Thorn-covered plants tore at her skin, fallen branches scraped her legs, her injuries throbbed with every step. But eventually she heard something. A faint dripping sound. Following the noise, she found a tiny trickle of water emerging from the soil. It wasn't much, but it gave her something to follow. She bent down and licked the droplets off the leads to hydrate herself. Food was a different problem. The dense forest floor grew almost nothing edible. People often imagine jungles full of fruits, but the Amazon canopy blocks sunlight, making it difficult for vegetation to grow below. She spotted mushrooms but avoided them. Her zoologist parents had taught her that Amazonian fungi could be deadly. After hours of searching, she found a small box of candy, likely from the plane. Only a handful remained, but even that was a precious lifeline. She decided to ration it, just a few pieces each day. The next challenge was nightfall. By 6 p.m., the jungle became pitch black. The temperature dropped, and unfamiliar animal noises filled the air. Juliane couldn't start a fire. The entire forest was soaked from the storm. She needed to find a safe place to sleep, somewhere animals wouldn't attack her from behind. She leaned against a large tree trunk and curled up as tightly as her injuries allowed. The sounds of the rainforest made it impossible to sleep peacefully, but exhaustion eventually won. Morning came slowly. Juliane woke up shivering and weak, but determined. She continued walking along the tiny water stream, using it as her guide. Hours turned into miles. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself forward. Then she saw it. A giant spider the size of her hand. The Goliath bird eater, the largest spider species on Earth. One bite could be fatal. She didn't panic. She simply stepped back, remembering what her parents taught her. Never provoke large predators in the jungle. As she continued walking, she suddenly heard the distant sound of an aircraft, a rescue plane. Her heartbeat surged. She waved her arms, screamed, ran through the open patches of jungle, but the trees were too thick. The plane passed overhead without noticing her. She collapsed to her knees. Rescuers were searching, but they couldn't see her. Deep inside, she realized a terrifying truth. The world believed everyone on Flight 508 was dead. No one would be looking for her much longer. With search teams giving up, Juliane knew she had only one hope left. She had to save herself before the jungle claimed her life.
Juliane kept walking along the thin stream, moving slowly but steadily. The sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy, creating shifting patterns of light that made it difficult to judge time. Hours blended together. She no longer knew whether she'd been walking for a day or several. Her watch had stopped working, her sense of direction was slipping, and hunger gnawed constantly at her stomach. But she kept repeating one thing in her mind: follow the water, follow the water. Eventually, the small trickle grew wider. The faint flow turned into a steady stream, and the stream began merging with bigger channels. She was heading towards something larger, something that might lead her to human life. By the third day, Juliane stumbled upon her first unmistakable sign of the crash site, a massive, scorched turbine lying mangled on the jungle floor. Its metal surface was pitch black, burned by the explosion. Finding it was both comforting and horrifying. If debris was scattered this far, the plane must have broken apart miles above. No wonder there were no other survivors. She kept listening for aircraft, and occasionally she did hear the distant hum of engines. Each time she stopped walking, rushed toward any clearing she could find, waved her arms and screamed until her throat ached. But the same thing happened again and again. The jungle was too dense. No one could see her. And each day, the sound of rescue planes became less frequent. On the fourth day, circling vultures caught her attention, large king vultures soaring low to the ground. Juliane instantly knew what that meant. Somewhere nearby, there were dead bodies. She approached cautiously and soon found 3 passengers still strapped to their seats, head first in the earth. Their bodies had hit the ground so violently that their heads were buried almost 3 feet into the mud. For a moment she froze. The woman among them looked around her mother's age. Terrified, she stepped closer and examined the woman's hands. No nail polish. A relief washed over her. Her mother never wore nail polish. The grim sight shook her, but she pushed forward. She had no choice. Days passed in a blur of exhaustion, pain, and hunger. Her box of candies emptied, her injuries throbbed, her skin burned from insect bites. The jungle floor was covered in roots and sharp branches, and every step barefoot felt like walking on knives. But the stream kept widening. By the 6th day, it became a larger, more powerful body of water. And along these waters lived animals she recognized from her childhood. The Hoatzin, a peculiar bird known to build nests near open rivers. Hearing its call made her heart jump. If Hoatzin birds were nearby, it meant she was close to a real river. And soon enough, the forest opened slightly. Juliane stepped onto the muddy edge of a 30-foot wide river, the biggest she had seen since the crash. For the first time in days, she could see open sky above her, an enormous relief after being trapped in the dim, suffocating undergrowth of the jungle. This river could take her to people, or it could take her deeper into danger. But she had no other choice. She followed the riverbank, but the progress was painfully slow. Fallen logs, thick bushes, thorny vines. Every obstacle forced her into the water. Eventually she realized something. Moving in the river, letting the current carry her, was easier than fighting the forest on land. So she lowered herself into the water and began to float. The Amazon river systems are home to caimans, anacondas, and piranhas. But Juliane knew their behavior. She stayed near the center of the river where most predators avoided deep, fast-moving water. The current carried her like a leaf, and she saved precious energy. But the water was cold. Hours of floating drained her strength further. Hallucinations began creeping in. She imagined rooftops. She imagined voices. She imagined food. None of it was real. Nights were the hardest. She dragged herself out of the river each evening, trembling uncontrollably from the cold, and collapsed on the muddy banks. Every morning she forced herself back into the water because the river was her only path to survival. On the 9th day, her injuries were worsening. Small white worms, maggots, were burrowing inside the wound on her arm, feeding on her flesh. She tried scraping them out with a metal ring, but they were too deep. Infection was inevitable. On the 10th day, she saw a caiman on the riverbank, a massive female. It lifted its head toward her, ready to strike. Juliane froze. She remembered a crucial lesson. Caimans rarely attack in deep water. Without hesitation, she slipped back into the river, The creature did not follow. Her body was shutting down. She could barely stand. She had eaten nothing but candy and river water for more than a week. She knew death could come at any moment. But just when her strength reached its absolute limit, she spotted something that made her heart stop. A boat. A real, solid boat. Not a hallucination. Rehook. Exhausted, injured, and delirious, Juliane had found a boat. But would it finally lead her to help, or to another dead end in the unforgiving Amazon?
For a moment, Juliane didn't trust her own eyes. After days of hallucinations and near-death exhaustion, the sight of the boat felt unreal, like another cruel trick of her starving mind. She blinked again. The boat was still there. She blinked a third time. It didn't disappear. This time, she let herself believe it. Mustering every ounce of fading energy, she swam closer. When her hand finally touched the wooden hull, a deep wave of relief rushed through her. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't her imagination. It was real. A boat meant people, and people meant rescue. Beside the river, she noticed a narrow path leading upward into the trees. She dragged her weak body toward it, gripping roots and branches to pull herself forward. Her legs trembled violently. Her breath came out ragged. Each movement sent pain shooting through her injured shoulder and broken collarbone. But slowly, she climbed. At the top of the short path stood a small shack, hidden between leaves and vines. It looked abandoned, just a basic shelter made of wood and palm leaves. When Juliane peeked inside, there was no one. But there were supplies. And one of those supplies was gasoline. Her heart raced. Gasoline meant she could finally remove the maggots burrowing inside her wounds. The idea terrified her. But the alternative was worse, an infection so severe that her arm might need to be amputated. She found a small cloth, dipped it into the gasoline, and took a trembling breath before pressing it onto her wound. The pain was immediate and intense. It felt like fire searing through her arm. The maggots, desperate to escape, began wriggling out of the wound. She gritted her teeth, trembling as she pulled them out one by one. When she counted them, the number horrified her. 30 maggots had been feeding inside her arm. Once she removed them, the pain eased slightly. Exhausted, she sank onto the wooden floor of the shack. She had intended to keep moving, but she couldn't. Her body was done. Her mind was slipping into darkness. She had almost no strength left to take another step. For the first time during the entire ordeal, she accepted a hard truth. If help didn't come soon, she wouldn't survive another day. She curled up inside the shack, waiting, listening to the river, the insects, the birds. Hours passed, then night, then morning. No one came. Her body felt like it was giving up. Hunger gnawed at her insides. Her legs could barely move, but she stayed near the shack, hoping someone, anyone, would return to this place. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and the jungle turned gold, she heard something. Voices. Human voices. Juliane froze. She wasn't sure if they were real. She had imagined voices before, but these were louder, closer, mixed with the sound of footsteps cracking twigs. She forced herself onto her elbows and struggled to sit upright. Suddenly, 3 men emerged from the jungle brush, local Peruvian woodcutters returning to their shelter. When they saw her, they stopped instantly, fear spreading across their faces. To them, she looked like a ghost, a pale teenage girl with torn clothing, matted hair, sunken eyes, and wounds covering her body. Some villagers in the Amazon grow up hearing stories of jungle spirits, mythical creatures, and omens. And at first sight, the men thought Juliane might be something supernatural. She raised her hand weakly and spoke in broken Spanish. "My name is Juliane. I survived the plane crash." The men stared in shock. Everyone believed there were no survivors from Flight 508. News had already spread that all passengers were dead. But this girl, this fragile, injured 17-year-old, was alive, and she had walked out of the jungle on her own. The men rushed to help her. One brought water, another food, farina, a type of roasted flour. A third helped clean her wounds again, removing anything that remained. More villagers eventually arrived, equally stunned.
The next morning, these men carried Juliane to a nearby river village. When she arrived, people gasped at the sight of her. Her eyes were red-shot, her body marked by cuts and burns, and her clothes nearly torn apart. From the village, a small plane was arranged to fly her to the nearest town with medical care. For the first time in 11 days, Juliane felt safe. But as she lay in the aircraft, another reality hit her. If she survived, what about her mother? Deep down, she already knew the answer. Juliane had escaped the Amazon alive, but the final truth she was about to learn would break her heart. What happened next would change her life forever.
Juliane was flown from the riverside village to a small medical outpost in Juliane Koepcke. When she arrived, the doctors and nurses stared in disbelief. The story of Flight 508 had spread across Peru. Everyone believed there were no survivors. Hearing that a teenage girl had walked out of the Amazon alive felt impossible. She was immediately treated for her wounds. Her infected cuts were cleaned, an IV was placed in her arm, and she was fed proper meals for the first time in almost 2 weeks. Her body, pushed past its limits, finally began to recover. But while the physical pain slowly began to ease, the emotional weight grew heavier. Juliane kept asking the same question: has my mother been found? The doctors avoided eye contact. They told her she needed rest. They said investigations were still ongoing. But Juliane had grown up in the jungle. She could read people easily. She already sensed the truth. A day later, officials gently confirmed it. Her mother had not survived the crash. Juliane turned her face away and cried silently. For 11 days, she had pushed forward with an unshakable hope, believing her mother might be waiting for her somewhere along the river, injured but alive. That hope had kept her moving when her body wanted to collapse. But now, hearing the final truth felt like the ground had dropped beneath her feet. Still, she had survived, and that survival came with a strange burden. Why her? Why was she the only one out of 86 people who lived? It would take years for her to find any sort of answer. In the weeks after her rescue, crash investigators reached the site again. Their findings shocked them. They discovered that 14 other passengers had survived the initial breakup of the plane, just like Juliane. But unlike her, they stayed near the crash site, waiting for help. They waited until infections, injuries, wildlife, or lack of resources ended their lives. This discovery shattered Juliane. If she hadn't known the Amazon, if she hadn't remembered her father's survival lessons, she might have shared their fate. But yet she didn't feel lucky. She felt guilty, conflicted, confused. Survival can be its own trauma. As the story spread around the world, journalists flocked to Peru. Many wanted interviews with the miracle girl of the Amazon. She tried to speak when needed, but the attention overwhelmed her. The jungle that nearly killed her became a topic of fascination everywhere, but for her, it was a place marked by deep loss. With time, her father brought her back to Germany to continue school, but Juliane never forgot the rainforest. Once she grew older, she returned to Peru to study biology, determined to understand and protect the ecosystem that shaped her life in the most unforgiving way. She eventually earned a doctorate and became a respected biologist, specializing in tropical ecology. She dedicated her life to conservation, to the Amazon, and to the research station her parents had founded decades earlier. After her father's passing, she became the director of the Panguana Biological Station, preserving the legacy that both her parents had built. Still, the memories of the crash haunted her. For years, she suffered nightmares, visions of falling, the screams, the thunder, the darkness. Every detail of those 11 days lived in her mind like a brand. But as time passed, she found something close to peace. Not because she forgot what happened, but because she understood that survival was something she could use to help others. Her story inspired books, documentaries, and research on aviation safety and wilderness survival.
Today, Juliane Koepcke is in her 70s, a respected scientist and educator. She continues her work, visiting the Amazon regularly. And every time she steps into the jungle, she does not do so with fear, but with reverence. Because she knows better than anyone that the Amazon is both a giver and a taker of life. Her survival wasn't luck alone. It was knowledge, determination, courage, a will to live when everything around her said she should not. Final rehook. End of part 5. Juliane fell from the sky into one of the world's deadliest jungles and walked out alive. Her story isn't just about survival, it's about resilience, courage, and the extraordinary strength hidden inside the human spirit.